So, you watched a random video about project management and you must be wondering how to put it all together in the real world. Let me explain my entire practical IT project management framework from start to finish. I'll show you how to manage any IT project in the real world. Let's dive in. First of all, we need a correct mindset towards project management. Many IT project managers fail to answer a basic question: what is a project? A project is a time-limited endeavor to create a unique product, service, or result. But this standard definition overlooks an important aspect. We produce this unique result to achieve a specific business goal. Therefore, project management is the application of skills, knowledge, and tools to increase projects' chances for success in achieving specific business objective, rather than creating a random product or service. Yes, this mindset makes project management more challenging for you, but it yields exceptional products, client satisfaction, and your career growth. Also, as the definition says, a project is a time-limited endeavor. It means it has a start and an end. So most of the work happens in between these points. But here's the first real-world problem. In the IT industry, we often develop products. For example, I developed some products for 5 years in a row. Was it one project? Well, no, it was a series of projects. But the challenge is that there were no clear start and end dates between them. They merged into one another. Nevertheless, to be a great project manager, you must learn how to set these project boundaries and ensure that each project has a clear goal. This leads us to the first essential project management concept, the project lifecycle. At the start of a project, we break it down into phases, and we must do it to make the whole project more manageable. And one phase typically involves specific work to produce one of the pieces of our project. However, what's more important is that these phases may involve work of different natures. So, for example, on a large IT project, we often follow a software development lifecycle. It may include the following phases: pre-sales, project initiation, concept development, prototyping, planning, requirements definition, UI design, development, integration, testing, deployment, hypercare, maintenance and handoff, closure, and support phases. For sure, it's a long list of many possible phases, but you don't use them all in every single project you lead. You need to identify which ones to use. In any case, on big projects, each phase may take several weeks to several months, so you can treat them as sub-projects. Unfortunately, on small projects, these phases often overlap and merge, making it difficult to differentiate between them. But here's what you need to understand. You can and should use different processes, tools, or even project management approaches in each of these phases. For example, we often use Scrum framework to manage the implementation phase of a software project. That's precisely how hybrid project management with Scrum or Kanban works. But at the same time, you'll probably never use Scrum to manage UI design or handoff phases. For those phases, you use something very simplistic. For example, you'll just track tasks and due dates for those tasks. Okay, I understand this sounds a bit complicated, but here's great news for you. If you work in one industry for most of your career, you need to learn no more than 2 or 3 typical project life cycles. Alright, I now want to highlight the main takeaway so far. The industry and niche where you work dictate the project management life cycle and most probably the approach you can take. There are just a few commonly accepted life cycles in each industry, so you don't need to invent a project management approach from scratch for each and every project. But that is not the only limiting factor. So here comes this second critical thing, and please pay attention. It will help you avoid a lot of stress and overwhelm. You do not run projects in a vacuum. You always lead projects within the organizational environment where you work. As a result, you always have many custom processes, policies, and tools that emerge from this organization's business administration activities. So you can't simply ignore the environment and manage projects at your own discretion. It will produce too much friction and inefficiency. Therefore, you must adapt to the environment. In the real world, each company develops its own project management approach tailored to its specific needs, so there is no such thing as a standard project management approach. That's why project management is more like the Frankenstein's monster combined together in one piece, rather than this seamless Captain America. Also, that's exactly why popular project management certifications won't help you become a great project manager. They give you this generic theory that doesn't work in the real world. On the bright side, your organization should provide you with office space, hiring departments, templates, project management software, lessons learned, and best practices from other projects, and access to subject matter experts. Most IT companies facilitate the execution of the projects. Usually they take the burden of organizing every aspect of the workplace off your team's shoulders, allowing you to focus on delivering project work. So that is why it's essential to align your project management approach with the environment in which you work. It should be like you are swimming with the current, not against it. Alright, with this in mind, let's consider these three cases. First, you work in an organization and you run a so-called in-house project. It's a project for the needs of the organization itself. In this case, you have one environment to deal with. Second, you work in client-vendor relationships. You have your organization, so-called performing organization, and you have client's organization that hired you to produce something. It operates in a completely different way. Third, you work within your organization and lead a project for an external client, but additionally, a third-party organization implements one of the project's components. And that's another real-world challenge. You must consider the requirements of all organizations to run a project and find common ground. It includes lifecycle processes, tools, roles, responsibilities, and approach in general. Alright, now imagine the client's organization. They have a business need to develop, for example, a software product. However, usually they lack the necessary expertise and human resources to accomplish an IT project. They begin searching for a vendor organization that can assist them. As a result, their representatives contact the sales team in your organization. And that's how the pre-sales phase of a project begins, and that's how projects appear in the world. But before it gets into the project management realm, the sales team and the client should negotiate the terms and conditions of a contract. As a project manager, you may help the sales team develop realistic terms, and therefore you may need to conduct very high-level project planning to ensure feasibility and determine the project's duration and budget. By the way, if it's an internal project, the idea is almost the same. Someone in the organization identifies a need to achieve a specific goal, so they initiate a project and find people to staff it. Could you please do me a favor right now? If you find this video useful so far, please click the like button, as it will help me reach more project managers like you who need this information. Alright, now it's time to discuss project stakeholders. A stakeholder is an individual, group, or organization that may be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project, according to the definition from the PMI's PMBOK guide. But in simpler words, your clients, the project owners, are your stakeholders. But likewise, your boss and some team members and subject matter experts from your organization are also stakeholders. The third-party vendor we mentioned a minute ago is also a stakeholder. So, stakeholders are all possible people and organizations who may gain or lose because of your project. There are many types of stakeholders and many reasons why they care about your project, and that's why you need to identify them all. Here it's a good idea to start using a stakeholder register to capture all the information about these stakeholders. And then you need to conduct a stakeholder analysis and determine how you want to interact with them. And when you work in the IT industry, here's what I want you to remember. Stakeholders provide requirements. Some provide requirements for your product or service that you need to create. Others provide requirements for the project management approach they want you to use in their environment. And here's a critical part. It's your responsibility to collect all requirements from all stakeholders for your project. In the real world, if you miss identifying important requirements from an important stakeholder, it will be your fault. In the worst-case scenario, this stakeholder will appear in the middle of the project and use their authority to force you to include the requirements in the project. As a result, you'll need to adjust your project plan, explain to other stakeholders how you missed this requirement, and probably request additional budget and time. Or in some cases, it may put the whole project at risk of failure. Let me illustrate it with a simple example. Imagine you have almost finished building an expensive house in the woods, but somehow you fail to identify a local environmental organization as a stakeholder. It appears that your house didn't comply with the environmental policies for this area, which you failed to identify as a requirement at the start of the project. Now you must pay a huge fine and replace the heating system in your house. So it results in additional expenses and total rework in the house. That's exactly why you must identify stakeholders early in the project. And likewise, you should be vigilant for new stakeholders throughout the project's lifetime. And what's even worse, stakeholders may change their attitude towards your project in the process. You need to track that as well. In the real world, if you work in a company for some time, you should already know many internal stakeholders. In fact, you need to continuously build working relationships with them and don't wait for a moment when a new project starts. Then you need to identify external stakeholders from the client side and those from your industry or niche that impact your project. Here you can apply stakeholder identification techniques, but in practice it means you need to talk with many people to discover even more people, groups of people, and organizations. Alright, here's another critical point where theoretical books on project management may mislead you. They talk about risk management way too late in the process. In the real world, you must start risk management activities in the pre-sales phase, before the project has started. Well, you may encounter critical risks right from the start of a project. Moreover, there might be urgent risks that require immediate attention and can't wait for the planning to finish. For example, your project may require expertise in an outdated technology, and there are just not that many experts on the market. Such risks may introduce a problem at the start of the project that will become apparent later during execution. Or it even may simply kill the project's feasibility before it starts because you missed an opportunity or there are simply no such experts on the market. Therefore, you continuously engage in risk management activities, even before the project officially commences. The framework may be as simple as this one. You continuously apply risk identification techniques in all project activities. The simplest one is always to ask the team and stakeholders, do you guys see any risks here? Or you can also apply various risk identification techniques. Then you log identified risks into the risk register. Or you can also use a RAID log for the same purpose. After that, you perform a risk analysis. You should conduct qualitative analysis, and in some cases, you may also consider quantitative risk analysis as well. Why do you need to conduct this analysis? In the real world, in most cases, you don't have enough time or resources to address all the risks, so you must select the most critical ones. Then, for the selected risks, you develop risk response plans. And there is a critical concept about creating those response plans that I'll explain later when we'll talk about planning. During execution, you monitor risks and implement risk response plans. In essence, this set of processes never stops during the whole project lifecycle. However, in the early stages of the project, you typically focus more on identifying risks. You are always on the lookout for those urgent and critical risks that could ruin the project at the start. And finally, we are ready to participate in the pre-sales phase of a project. You have started stakeholder and risk management, and you will support the sales team with feasibility analysis and high-level planning. And here's the main catch. The outcome of this phase is a signed contract with the client. And quite often, clients don't even discuss their actual project goals in this document. Moreover, a contract typically doesn't include all or even any project details. Instead, it outlines only the overall business relationships between our organizations. That's why if you don't participate in the pre-sales phase yourself, you will need to find a way to access all the notes, emails, agreements that were creating during this phase with the client. On the other hand, in some cases, a contract may have strict deadlines or a total budget for the project, and this becomes a constraint for you, so you should take it into account. Also, it's critical that you understand different types of contracts like times and materials, fixed price contract, managed services contract, and agile contracts. It's important because different types of contracts require different strategies for planning your project and engaging stakeholders. But this is an advanced topic and goes far beyond the scope of this tutorial, and people in your organization should usually guide you through this process. In any case, whether you participated in the pre-sales phase or not, you will need to initiate project next. It's a transition from sales and contract negotiations into project management. As you recall from the definition, we need to identify three key elements: the business objective, the unique result we aim to produce, and the project boundaries. To initiate a project, we usually use a tool called a project chart. The project charter is a document that includes high-level information about the project that we need before we start planning. A project charter usually includes project description, business case, project objectives, pre-assigned resources, stakeholders, known requirements, description of products or major deliverables, assumptions, constraints, and project risks. Please note that this is not a comprehensive description of the project. The project charter should be no longer than 5 pages, and the shorter the better. In the real world, you may need to create a formal document. However, in most cases, you'll simply collect and discuss this high-level information to develop a shared understanding of the project. It's a super critical step. In the process, you'll eliminate many miscommunications right from the start. Additionally, you'll begin to control stakeholders' expectations towards your project. You do this by showing your understanding what's in the project scope, the boundaries of the project, and whether the constraints appear realistic for delivering those results. So the goal is to ensure that all stakeholders understand the project in the same way. However, what's even more important is that the charter becomes your North Star. You must align all your future efforts with this project charter. You need to question everything that doesn't align with the project goal and business case in that project charter. That's why after obtaining a sign-off or agreement on the project charter, you should pause. Now take a broader look at the project charter, contract, your clients, your environment, available tools, processes, templates, and everything else at your disposal. Here you must decide which project management approach to take and what frameworks to use. Again, it's not like you need to invent something new. Instead, you need to choose from one, two, maybe three options available in your organization. Again, in most cases, you'll simply follow your organization's established project management approach as is. Of course, you'll need to do minor adjustments to meet the project's needs, but you don't invent the wheel. You see, in the IT industry, we have various project management approaches. We can use a plan-driven, or often referred to as a waterfall approach, and here you'll continue with in-depth planning for all project aspects before execution begins. Or we can go fully agile, and after the contract is signed, you'll use the Scrum framework and proceed directly to the implementation phase. Or we can use a hybrid approach. It means you will break down the project into phases, perform this high-level planning, and decide on the best approach to use in each phase. Generally, whether to adopt a plan-driven approach or an agile one depends on the requirements. If you can get the project requirements upfront and you are certain they won't change, a plan-driven approach is more efficient. In all other cases, go with a hybrid agile approach. I recommend starting any IT project with a hybrid approach. It provides you with the balance of flexibility and structure to manage stakeholders' expectations. And in general, that's how most IT companies work right now. Oh, by the way, let me know if you want me to create a separate video on how to select the most appropriate project management approach. Just pause the video right now and let me know in the comments. Thank you for your participation. Alright, next we need to talk about the project management plan. After you have a clear understanding of the project lifecycle, project management approach, you need to outline the project management plan. There are different projects. In some cases, a project management plan may be a mandatory formal document, and you must create it in all the details. But again, in the real world, in most commercial IT projects, you don't need a fully written project plan. Therefore, it's perfectly fine to keep all the details in your head if all stakeholders understand how you're going to lead the project to success. But at the same time, if you have never created a formal project management plan, I recommend doing this exercise at least once. Just take the 10 major project management knowledge domains that PMI describes, like integration, scope, time, cost, budget, quality, risk, stakeholder management, communication, resources, and procurement management. Then list all the processes, tools, templates, and workflows inside your organization. And then try to illustrate how they interact with each other. This exercise will help you identify areas for improvement and inefficiencies in your current project management approach. And additionally, it will help you systemize your knowledge and understanding of the entire system. At this point, we begin the planning process, following the project management approach we have selected. And in any case, there are two fundamental principles you need to follow. First, you plan the project specifically to reach the objectives stated in the project charter. Second, focus on specifying and delving into the high-level information you captured in the charter. These principles will safeguard you from spending resources on something clients didn't ask for. Moreover, clients will always want to maximize the return on their investment in the project, and the charter will help you control the expanding demands within the constraints and boundaries of the project. On the other hand, if clients do want to adjust project objectives, it's totally fine with us, but they need to update the charter, which will allow you to renegotiate the project budget and timelines. Before we jump into the details of project planning, you must understand the most critical planning technique. This technique is what makes hybrid project management so popular. And I'm talking about the rolling wave planning technique. In practice, this means that you'll conduct high-level planning first, and you'll use all the same processes and tools, but at a higher level, and you apply it to all aspects of the project: scope, budget, schedule, risks, and everything else. Notice, you do it at the start of the project, so you have a limited understanding of your project. But your goal is to allocate sufficient time and resources to ensure you can implement the requirements regardless of the circumstances. And yes, it usually means that your project plan is a bit bloated with buffers and reserves. And it's totally fine as long as you are transparently communicating it to stakeholders. You see, this high-level planning satisfies stakeholders' needs for clarity, control, and predictability, even if they just perceive these benefits. After that, you progressively elaborate on the requirements that you need to implement in the near future. Again, you plan all aspects of the project for the next few weeks or months. That's why you don't need to spend weeks or months planning the entire project in all details at the onset. However, keep in mind that you need to dedicate sufficient effort to this progressive elaboration later. You don't do it alone, it's the team's effort. Alright, when discussing project planning, we must first address the concept of project deliverables. A deliverable is a tangible and testable part of your project that you and your team need to produce for the success of the project. Now, imagine that the final product or result is your main, big, complete project deliverable. But you should always strive to break it down into smaller, more manageable deliverables. Unfortunately, many IT project managers don't understand the critical value of this concept. Why? Well, because most IT projects involve software development, so it's easy to believe that you have only one deliverable, your software product. But even a small software project can have multiple deliverables such as UI/UX designs, an intermediate version of your product for some demonstration purposes, or a mandatory cybersecurity test report. Obviously, when managing a large IT project, you have numerous deliverables, and you need to work with your stakeholders and team to break down your final product or result into these small pieces that comprise the whole product. And after that, we need to identify requirements for each major deliverable of the project. And the idea is that first you need to collect business requirements from the clients. Usually you take those requirements right from the project charter. Then you need to identify stakeholder requirements from clients and stakeholders of all relevant fields. Typically, we use epics and product requirements documents in the IT industry. After that, you need to work with your team and subject matter experts to develop solutions and specify product and system requirements. And in the IT industry, user stories are typically the primary form for these requirements. In practice, when I say collect or identify requirements, I mean attending lots of meetings with stakeholders, reviewing documentation and analyzing competitors, and then writing it all down as epics and user stories. Ideally, you should not collect requirements yourself. A business analyst or a product manager is a designated role on a project specifically trained to collect requirements professionally. And that's why you need to focus on stakeholder identification and collaboration here. Usually, don't try to identify requirements out of thin air. It all comes from collaboration with stakeholders and the team. Again, always keep in mind that each new stakeholder may provide new requirements. But here's another real-world problem. Stakeholders may provide you with requirements that either don't support the project goal or they conflict with one another. To help you manage these stakeholder requirements and conflicts, you can use requirements traceability metrics. In theory, it's just a spreadsheet that maps the project requirements to the stakeholders who requested them, the project objectives that these requirements help achieve, work breakdown structure elements, and other aspects of the project. But in practice, I recommend implementing the concepts and ideas of the RTM within the project management tool you use. For example, you can use custom fields in Jira and its table view to create a requirements traceability matrix. When defining requirements, you also need to consider quality management. And think about the quality of your product as a separate set of additional requirements. In the IT industry, you must develop processes and utilize technical solutions to ensure quality of your products. You need to think about the environments for development. For example, you may need to set up development, QA, staging, and production environments. You need to write the definition of done for user stories, and on the other hand, developers may need to write additional tests for their own code. Also, the quality assurance team requires an overall strategy for testing and verifying product quality. They need also rules and guidelines for defects. So, you get the point. You can't implement this on the fly. You need a strategy upfront. But here's what's even more important. You need to understand that all this work is in the scope of the project. You need to identify tasks and allocate sufficient time and resources to ensure that your team can maintain quality and address defects. Again, remember that during the initial planning, we do it on a high level. Later, we elaborate on everything in all the details using the rolling wave technique. So, you collected high-level requirements and identified major deliverables, and it's a critical checkpoint. First of all, notice that you worked a lot with subject matter experts and your team till this point. But you can't read your client's mind, and they can't read yours as well. So do not assume that you are fully aligned with the requirements and deliverables that clients want. You must verify it. Second, don't assume your clients have the same industry knowledge and understanding as you do. You must explain what they will get as a result of the project. That's why on some projects where the main deliverable or the solution to the business objective is not that clear, you may want to create a project scope statement. Project scope statement outlines all project deliverables and explains how they will be created in very simple language. Clients should understand what you'll do. It's critical because next you'll put a lot of time and effort into creating a plan to implement those exact deliverables. After that, you'll spend all the project resources to create those deliverables. Therefore, you must ensure that it's precisely what your clients need. Moreover, they should be confident that these deliverables with these requirements will help them reach project's business objectives. For example, if you need to create an AI-powered product for a non-technical client, I strongly recommend creating a project scope statement to explain how you deliver the project outcomes. In theory, clients need to sign off on this document and give you green light to proceed. Next, we get to another critical integration point. We need to break down our major deliverables from the project scope statement into smaller, more manageable pieces. We need to use the work breakdown structure here. The work breakdown structure is the tool that helps you break down the whole project scope and identify 100% of it. It consists of big pieces of tangible results that we already called deliverables and smaller pieces called work packages. These all have unique identifiers that clearly state their position in the WBS, and we call it WBS index. In practice, we place deliverables from the scope statement at the first level of the decomposition in WBS. And by the way, from practical standpoint, I recommend that you retain the naming conventions for deliverables that come from clients. Again, the idea is to first list all major components of the project, then we need to decompose each deliverable into smaller components, the work packages. And remember that work packages should also be finished, tangible and testable pieces of the project, but just smaller. In practice, it again means lots of meetings with subject matter experts and the team. However, it's crucial that you clearly explain the concepts and rules of a quality WBS to them. They don't know these concepts. For example, one rule of thumb from the controlling standpoint is to make a work package small enough to fit within one reporting period. That's how you know that you have broken down the project deep enough. And here's another important rule. If something is not in the work breakdown structure, it's not a part of the project. Again, in practice, it means that if you can't logically categorize a piece of work under one of the major deliverables, you have most likely failed to identify 100% of the project scope. And it's a warning sign for scope creep. Again, in the real world, I don't recommend creating a separate document for WBS. Instead, you must use the concepts inside your project management application to structure your project the same way. Next, we go one step further, or deeper. We decompose all work packages into tasks. Ideally, one team member should be able to finish a task from start to finish. And from experience, I prefer tasks no longer than 3 working days long. Such a level of decomposition provides better accuracy for estimating. Notice that if you do the first round of high-level planning, you don't break down deliverables or work packages into tasks. And I'm providing this step as a general logical flow for whole project planning. And now I think it's a great moment to talk about all these project management software applications. As you may understand, there will be hundreds of tasks. These tasks will have lots of attributes. Then you'll assign dependencies and line them up on the calendar. So tracking all these attributes, for example, in Excel, is a waste of your time and effort. Making a simple change in this whole project plan will be extremely painful. That's exactly why creating a work breakdown structure is a common starting point for all project management software applications like MS Project, Rike, or Merlin Project. So, decomposition of your product into deliverables and the rest of the steps I'm going to explain next should happen in the dedicated PM software. And in general, it's best to keep all project information in just one tool. A word of warning though. Any project management application is dumb. It's a fancy calculator, and it does what you tell it to do. Therefore, if you apply incorrect project management principles, your software will provide misleading picture. Therefore, you must understand the underlying principles of each application. And here's another tip from practical experience. You need to understand that project planning is a fluid, iterative process, so you should not be super rigid here. It means that while identifying requirements and discussing different capabilities, you may identify additional deliverables. And similarly, you may find deliverables that were not mentioned before, and now you need to determine all the additional requirements for those deliverables. The problem is that there is no one step-by-step rigid workflow here. You may need to jump around and update the results of the previous steps in your planning. Somewhere at this point in planning, you may also need to start thinking about whether you need to outsource some project deliverables, and it's called a make or buy decision. Many considerations go into these decisions. The major one is whether your organization has the required resources, expertise, and infrastructure to implement all the deliverables. Usually you don't make this decision yourself. Instead, you provide justification to stakeholders for a need to outsource a part of the project. You provide them with the plan details you already have. At this moment, we have already decomposed the work packages into tasks. Now our goal is to estimate each task, and typically we begin by assessing the resources required to complete a task. You need to consider people's skill sets and levels of expertise. If you don't have a team yet, you'll have to create these role descriptions for the recruitment department. For example, based on deliverables and requirements, your project may require 2 senior-level backend developers, 1 mid-level front-end developer, and 3 quality assurance engineer. You may need to draft the job descriptions for the recruitment department to find these people for you. That's why you'll need to specify the required years of experience, proficiency in the technologies and tools the project will use, and maybe some soft skills. Alternatively, if you already have a pre-assigned, prepaid team, you can start assigning people to tasks. Okay, on top of that, you also need to analyze equipment, materials, and tools required for these tasks. So then we need to plan to acquire all these resources. Sometimes a company has a pool of people we can take for our project, so we'll need to negotiate internally. However, we may also need to hire these people from the market. From an equipment and materials perspective, we have the same situation. The company may have the stock that we can use, it may have a list of vendors that we can contract, or we may need to find these vendors from scratch. In the IT industry, it often boils down to selecting the provider for cloud technologies we'll use. For example, we may opt for Google, Amazon, or Microsoft, and their corresponding cloud stacks, such as Google Cloud Platform, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft Azure. This analysis of the required resources and people will result in 2 separate documents. The first one is the Human Resource Acquisition Plan. Nothing scary here, it's just a list of vacant roles on your project and the dates when you need them to join the team. The second document is the Procurement Management Plan. Again, you need to plan how you will acquire equipment, tools, servers, licenses, and when you expect them. Here you'll need to engage with the procurement department of your organization. And in many cases, you'll need to reach out to your clients because they own the accounts to the cloud providers we mentioned. In any case, these 2 plans will impact your schedule because we can't hire people the next day we need them. It may take months. The same goes for equipment and materials. Your project schedule will have due dates for all those resources and access to the client's cloud technologies. Next, we need to estimate the duration it takes for the assigned role or people to finish the task. And a critical side note here. As a project manager, you should not estimate tasks yourself. If you already have a team, they obviously do it. However, if you don't have any team members yet, you should request a pre-assigned expert to assist you. But always consider the average productivity of a role based on the experience level you identified, not the knowledge level of an expert who does the estimate. With this information, we can assign dependencies between tasks and create a draft of the project schedule. Again, if you work on a high-level plan, you work with deliverables and work packages to identify dependencies. And in the IT industry, you'll often hear the term product roadmap. In a sense, it's your project schedule that shows when you plan to implement different epics and user stories, and you may need to map them to your sprint's schedule. In reality, it requires multiple iterations to create a final and realistic version of the schedule. Here are the step-by-step instructions on how to do it for a plan-driven project. You can pause now to review this list in case you need to provide a detailed schedule. Next, we can determine the average prices for the materials and hourly rates for the type and level of labor required, so you can easily calculate the total cost of a task. The same idea applies to the cloud technologies we'll use. You need to estimate the required database capacity, performance of the servers, and other relevant factors. Usually cloud providers like Microsoft and Amazon provide you with these calculators. In any case, the idea is always to perform the bottom-up estimate. First you estimate all tasks and then summarize them to the work package level. Then you summarize work packages to deliverable level. And just a side note for the IT and similar knowledge-based industries. The approach I have just described is a generic way of estimating and scheduling tasks, so it works in any industry. But you can optimize it for the IT industry. For example, in software development, you typically have a prepaid team for weeks or months ahead. So rather than assigning resources, estimating duration, or multiplying by the hourly rate, you simply estimate the effort required to finish a task in person hours. In this case, the primary goal is to utilize the available personnel as efficiently as possible, and you don't need to provide this detailed task breakdown and estimates. That's exactly how you'll do it if you will use the Scrum framework to break down your user stories into tasks and estimate them for the current sprint. Okay, I keep telling you that you have created the draft version of schedule and budget, and that's because we need to perform risk management activities before we can finalize our project plan. We have been identifying and analyzing risks since the project beginning, but now we need to run a dedicated risk identification session or multiple sessions based on the drafts of our plan. Then finalize the analysis, select the risks that need to be addressed, and develop risk response plans. But what does it mean to create a risk response plan? First, it means that you come up with a specific action plan to overcome the negative impact of the risk. Then, someone needs to execute that plan. Moreover, they may need money and resources to do it. So, in essence, it means you need to create more tasks. Additionally, you need to allocate extra time or resources to mitigate the negative impact of a risk if it occurs. Therefore, it's critical that these risk response plans are included into your project scope, schedule, and budget. By the way, sometimes you may need to introduce new processes and tools to overcome a risk or even a group of risks. And in this case, you must ensure that these new processes integrate seamlessly with other existing processes and tools. And also, you must ensure that stakeholders are comfortable with these changes. So as you can see, risk management requires lots of proactive communication on multiple fronts. and it's your responsibility to educate people how to use proper risk management activities. After updating your project management plan with risk responses, you need to validate that it's still feasible. So you literally go to the beginning of the process and quickly run all the checks we have discussed so far. The last critical step here is to create project baselines. A baseline is essentially the final approved version of the project scope, schedule, and budget. Baselines are critical for any project management approach. They will help you track project progress towards the initial goal. Let me try to explain the importance of this project management concept. Imagine you are the captain of a ship. You need to sail from port A to port B. And in the real world, a single vessel can leave a port without a plotted route. It's not allowed by law. The reason is that you have a plotted course, and you continuously track your progress. If you deviate from the route, you adjust your course to get back to this line. You do not change the whole path every time you deviate. Now imagine you don't have this plotted route, you only have direction. In this example, even following straight north, you may end up in a completely different port after a slight deviation. I want you to remember that you don't merely manage the work on the project. You execute the project management plan you created. It's a super critical concept. The plan gives you planned values for all aspects of the project. Then, during the project execution process, you'll collect the actual values, and you always compare those values. And in the real world, nothing goes as planned. No matter your methodology or framework, you always compare planned values with actual ones to find the deviation. Now let's talk about professional project management. You see, you need to track all aspects of the project the same way: quality, communication, stakeholder engagement, team motivation, resource acquisition, and everything else. If you notice a deviation, you start applying productivity techniques, motivation, leadership strategies, and perhaps even a bit of micromanagement to get back on track with the initial plan. If the deviation becomes too big and you can't control it, you need to start negotiating to make a change in the project plan, specifically in the project baselines. These are changes in deadlines, budget, and scope of work. Obviously, you need to ensure that after this change, you will be able to finish the project with the updated baselines. And most importantly, you won't have to request another change for the same problem in a week or two. Alright, we did it. We have planned the project. Now we can have a rest. Well, actually I have a bad feeling about it, because I've just said that nothing in the real world goes according to plan. You see, if you selected the hybrid project management approach, it means you have created only a high-level plan. Now you'll move into execution with Scrum or Kanban. For the next few months or years, you will iteratively and incrementally work through the high-level requirements. You'll progressively implement the final product or result. If you selected a plan-driven approach, it's the same idea. You'll use the rolling wave and create one deliverable at a time. In both cases, your project management plan simply outlines the work. However, it lacks detailed instruction for resolving technical problems. It doesn't solve conflicts. And of course, your plan doesn't motivate people to collaborate. So, you need to encourage and facilitate interactions between team members, stakeholders, and subject matter experts on a daily basis. You need to motivate them to search for solutions and implement them. Then you'll need to resolve conflicts, remove impediments, and motivate people to push forward. Also, include interviews, performance reviews, one-on-one meetings, trainings, discussions, and other relevant activities. All these activities ultimately result in some form of communication. Most likely, this will be additional meetings, emails, phone calls, documentation, and Slack messages, and so on. Overall, you'll spend about 80% of your workday communicating in one way or another. And you'll do it to ensure that the team works on the tasks they need to work on today. Additionally, you'll look maybe a few days ahead to ensure that there are no blockers there. So planning was an intensive period, but it's relatively short compared to the upcoming execution. And execution is a daily grind. That's why I recommend that you establish daily project routines. They will help you keep sanity and control over your project. If you use, for example, Scrum framework, it will dictate most of the daily routines you need. But in any case, here are the routines I recommend you have on any project with any project management approach. First, project information maintenance routine. You must dedicate up to half an hour to ensure that all team members report their progress, log their time, expenses, risks, and other performance data in the project management software. It's better to do it daily rather than scrambling to gather all the required information when you need to send a progress report. Second, you need a daily sync-up meeting with the team. It's a brief meeting where team members report on their daily progress and any issues they have encountered. It's your opportunity to correct the team's work if needed. Third, you must conduct daily sync-ups with clients and project owners. Ideally, you want to keep project owners informed and engaged on a daily basis. Fourth, we have a daily motivation routine. You must dedicate 30 minutes per day to motivate one or two team members. And don't wait for a special event to connect with your people. Small, meaningful interactions have a great compound effect. Fifth is the communication routine. Specifically, I'm talking about writing emails and reports. I recommend that you reply to emails at specific times. Pick maybe 2 or 3 time slots per day and be intentional in cleaning up your inbox. Also, you can try to put meetings in batches. It gives you free time slots for deep work. And remember that you must continuously dedicate time to rolling wave planning, and you need to work with your team to collect requirements, decompose and estimate future tasks, and add details to your project schedule and budget. Alright, let me start by painting the real picture. In this video, I've only just scratched the surface of what it takes to master all aspects of IT project management. You could spend hours and days searching on YouTube or in ChatGPT for scattered tools, processes, and techniques. And then you are left to figure out how to bring it all together into a smooth, cohesive system that works in the real world. So let me ask you this. How valuable would it be to have this entire practical IT project management framework broken down for you step by step, in details and with examples? You watch this long video despite your busy schedule for a reason. And maybe you're dreaming of becoming a project manager, but don't know where to start or what skills really matter. Or you are a junior PM feeling overwhelmed by risk management, leadership, and handling seasoned teams. Maybe you are a mid-level project manager itching to become a strategic leader, but frustrated by generic certifications like PMP or Prince2 that don't deliver. Here's where you stand right now. You basically have 2 clear choices. Option number 1, keep trying to piece it all together on your own and find yourself in the same spot a year from now, wasting effort, time, and missing out on promotions. Option number 2, fully commit today to mastering the practical IT project management framework in just 30 days. And then use a proven real-world roadmap that I have created from 15 years in the trenches. So, which path will you take? That's why I'm thrilled to introduce you to my Practical IT Project Management Mastery course. This is not theory of fluff. It's a tested framework that works in real IT environments, designed to give you everything you need for successful project management career. And the best part, you get lifetime access, so you can learn at your own pace or revisit the content when your career demands it. Imagine confidently leading larger, more complex projects and finally receiving the recognition you deserve. You're probably wondering about the investment. And the truth be told, I could easily price this program at $1,000 given its value and the success hundreds of students have already achieved. But I'm on a mission. I believe that if I can train 10,000 great project managers who each positively impact at least 100 people, the world will be a better place. So I made it as affordable as possible. If you are ready to become a great project manager, go and check out all the course details and bonuses for yourself. When you compare the value to the price, your decision should be a non-brainer. So, will you continue to struggle alone for years to come and repeat all the same mistakes that all project managers make? Or will you seize this opportunity to get practical mastery in just 30 days and start building the project management career you deserve? Click this button now and get started today. I'll see you on the inside.